Welcome to the What About series, where we talk about therapy topics in a highly condensed and easily digested way.
Our goal is to help the average person understand some of the more complex or misunderstood aspects of the mental health world. Let's get right into it.
All right. Well, welcome to episode 9. 9 of the What About series. Today we're talking about DID, or otherwise known as Dissociative Identity Disorder. And the reason that we chose this topic is because I have, as of late, become obsessed with the new Disney Plus series, Moon Knight. And I think it's awesome. For anyone who's seen it, you know that the main character suffers from DID, Dissociative Identity Disorder. And you get to see how that plays into his life. And I think it's a really cool adaptation of what that looks like. And it's very accurate from my understanding. I guess disclaimer, we talked about this before we started the episode, that neither of us claim to know anything about DID like extensively.
No one does.
No one should, because it is a highly complex mental disorder, and we don't fully understand it. The research is hard to quantify, I guess, because it's really hard to understand.
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot of research on it anyway in the first place. It's kind of more of a recent thing that we've been trying to understand the why behind it, and the really still the what
is causing
what it is and what's causing it. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. And one thing that we need to just get out of the way right now is that dissociative identity disorder is otherwise known as multiple personality disorder. And some of you are probably like, oh,
they're the same thing.
Okay, gotcha. I've heard of that before. I've never heard of DID.
Yeah, so. I think it was multiple personality disorder in the last edition of the DSM. So the DSM-4, I believe that's when it switched to the DSM-4 to the DSM-5.
Yeah.
I believe the name changed.
Probably somewhere in there, yeah. I'm not exactly sure what year it was.
Yeah, I know it did change in the DSM, and that's why we saw like the people still think of the multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's a cultural thing too, like a pop psychology, pop culture thing. That's what people know it as. So it's the same thing, just by a different name. It's like autism spectrum disorder and like Asperger's. It's same thing, different name, different classifications, I guess. But yeah, it is go by that name, and it's a highly misunderstood and complex
just
disorder.
Mysterious.
Very mysterious.
It is, very mysterious.
Which is played out very well in that show, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it today, because I wanted to learn more about it. But getting into the summary here, this comes from, I believe this summary comes from psychiatry.org. But it says here that dissociative identity disorder, or as we're going to be calling it the rest of the episode, DID, to avoid any tongue twisters. DID is a form of dissociation, a mental process which produces a lack of connection in a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, or a sense of identity. Dissociative identity disorder is thought to stem from a combination of factors that may include trauma experienced by the person with the disorder. The dissociative aspect is thought to be a coping mechanism. The person literally shuts off or dissociates from themselves from a situation or experience that's too violent, traumatic, or painful to assimilate with their conscious self. So that summarizes pretty well what we're going to be talking about today. That it's a literal dissociation from yourself into a different form. And again, the reason I bring up Moon Knight so much is because I feel like it does show pretty well what that could look like and of course it's dramatized, it's a show, it's just a movie, it's an actor portraying it, but it can be two very different people, and it's a form of dissociation to avoid an unwanted event. And that's where it kind of gets foggy, where I don't understand it, but it's just a very severe form of dissociation, which we see a lot of other mental disorders, like schizophrenia being the biggest one, where we see a lot of dissociation and delusion. But multiple personality, DID takes it a step further, where there's like a separate person or multiple people living within you.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about this before we started recording too, but the movie Split, I've never seen it, but Austin has, and he was telling me about it, and the guy has like 6 personalities or something like that.
It's more than 5. I think it's like
more than 5, less than 7.
More than 5, less than let's say more than 5, less than 10. I think if I had to guess, I think it's 7 or 8. It's a lot.
Okay.
And, he switches in between them throughout the film, and that's a good movie too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. But Yeah, we don't fully know exactly how this happens, if at all. We don't know how this actually happens, how the brain creates a different self, creates multiple selves. It's different with everyone. And so, to be frank, we don't know. And I'm sure if you tried to take a deep dive on research, maybe you could find something on it. But as of now, we're not exactly sure.
Yeah, and I guess I did want to point out that there are statistics. We do know how many people have it. It's a very low amount of people that actually get diagnosed with this and have the actual disorder itself. I believe it's between 0.01% and 1% of the world population will actually end up being diagnosed with this at any given time. Like right now in the world, it's somewhere between 0.01 and 1% of the population. So it's very, very uncommon.
Which is still quite a bit of people.
Yeah, it's in the grand scheme of 7 billion people. That's still they'd be in the millions. That's
still a good amount. Yeah.
I don't want to do the math right now because that's what I was doing earlier was math homework, and I don't want to do more of it.
Bless
but
you.
It's still a lot of people. I believe it's more than actual diagnosed gender dysphoria.
I believe it.
And so, or around the same. I think gender dysphoria is also 0.01%.
Yeah.
So it's around the same amount as like diagnosable gender dysphoria. To give context, it's about the same.
Yeah, and this had a big surge, I think, in the 80s, might have been the 70s, where there were hundreds of people in every city in the United States that started to have these symptoms of DID. And yeah, really interesting. Strange.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So we're going to jump right into the symptoms here. So the symptoms, let's see. We got 5 of them here. So the first one, these aren't in any specific order. The first symptom is the existence of 2 or more distinct identities or personality states. The distinct identities are accompanied by changes in behavior, memory, and thinking. The signs and symptoms may be observed by others or reported by the individual. And I mean, that's going to be the most important symptom. Mm-hmm. The symptom of DID is distinct identities. And we'll go more into that as well as far as why and how, but that's the first symptom there.
Yeah, and the second one we see here is our ongoing gaps in memory about everyday events, personal information, and or past traumatic events. And with the ongoing gaps in memory about everyday events, I believe that's due to the fact that you might switch into from the home personality, I think that's what it's called. Due to any type of trigger, you might just transfer into another personality. Again, I don't know how that works or the proper verbiage for it. It's such a complex thing.
Yeah.
But it's at any given day, you wake up, but you're one of the other personalities instead of your home personality. And you go through that day living as that personality, and then you wake up from that personality and have a gap in memory.
Yeah.
And I believe that's where it comes from, is the gaps in memories come from living in the state of a different personality that's not the home personality or the personality in charge. There's a specific term for it. Can't remember what it is at this time. Maybe I can look it up here. But ongoing gaps in memory is a huge symptom as well that goes specifically with DID.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, while I go over this, you can look that up.
Yeah.
The next one here is symptoms cause significant distress or problems in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. And this is a symptom and part of the diagnosis for really any mental health disorder. In order for it to be actually diagnosed, it needs to be causing distress in your life in one aspect or another.
I'm not finding it right now, so maybe we can come back to that later. Next symptoms, though, you're going to see the common symptoms that you'll find with other mental health disorders or struggles. Anxiety and depression are very common, and that's not necessarily a symptom, but more of a result of the, it's like a byproduct of the disorder itself. If you were to have multiple personalities and a series of past traumatic events, you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have depression, and substance abuse is also very common within people that are diagnosed with DID. So that's another common thing. Again, is a byproduct and not necessarily a symptom of the disorder.
Yeah. Now, the last symptom here that we're going to cover is there's suicidal thoughts or feelings. Now, here's a really intense statistic. So more than 70% of those with DID have attempted suicide. And that's really sad, and that's really heavy. But that's the reality. I mean, because if you try, just put yourself in their shoes, right? This is the same thing with anything. If someone is going through something, put yourself in their shoes, and I can't even imagine living, okay, but you can't remember living. Kind of weird.
Yeah.
You know, you go through events, you go through your day, you have experiences, and depending on the personality that's present, you may not remember anything. And I just can't imagine how frustrating that would be, and just and scary. I mean, you could wake up in a place that you have no idea where you are.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think that's
really sad.
I think that's a symptom or a feeling that's portrayed really well in the Moon Knight show. It's obviously dramatized in a lot of it, and it's about Egyptian mythology. But there are certain aspects of the show that really show the humanity of someone who suffers with this disorder. There's one scene where he's at work, and a girl comes up to him and says, "I'm so excited about our date tomorrow, right? 7:00 at the steakhouse." And he's like, "Oh yeah, see you there." He obviously didn't remember that one of the other personalities set up the date, and then one of his coworkers comes up and says, "You're a vegan. Like, what are you gonna order at a steakhouse?" And he's like, "I don't remember asking her to go to a steakhouse. Maybe I'll just get a salad." And then a couple days, the day was supposed to be the next day, and then he wakes up what he thinks is the next day, and he goes to the steakhouse and he sits down, and his date never shows up, and he thinks he got stood up. And he calls his date and says, like, "Where are you? I'm here at the steakhouse. Like, I've been here for an hour." And she's like, "Well, I was there 2 days ago for 3 hours waiting for you."
Oh my gosh.
And he just gets really depressed, and he orders a steak even though he's a vegan. And
Good for him.
Yeah, he's eating a steak, yeah, and he gets really, really depressed over that moment.
Yeah.
And so I think just kind of playing into how annoying and how frustrating that might be to have these gaps in your memory and this inability to... It's like a total lack of stability in your life, even in your base, like who you are as a person. That must be really frustrating. And for 70% of people to attempt suicide doesn't surprise me. As haunting as that is, it doesn't surprise me.
Right. I mean, you can see why they'd say, I might as well not be alive if I don't even know what I'm doing, who I'm talking to, and the memories I'm making.
Yeah, and that should be like the number one thing you do have is who you are as a person. No one can take that away from you, but your brain is taking it away from yourself. Yeah. Which is a very sad reality for the people that struggle with this. But so going into the risk factors now, the risk factors are pretty common with other disorders, I guess, but what specifically with DID is a history of trauma is very specifically important to this disorder. Because a study has found that about 90% of people with DID were physically and or sexually abused as children. And that kind of goes back to how DID, the split personalities, the multiple personalities, is a coping mechanism because of the past traumatic events. Yeah, and that's what I was going to say here. The origins of dissociative disorders, and like dissociative disorders in general, not just DID, is that they are the direct result of exposure to traumatic experiences called the post-traumatic model. So according to the PTM, or post-traumatic model, dissociative symptoms can best be understood as mental strategies to cope with or avoid the impact of highly aversive experiences. Now, Austin and I, again, were talking about this before the episode, and just thinking how or why. And as far as the how goes, I don't know. Like, I don't know how the brain's going to split your personalities, split who you are and form a new self, which is interesting. But also the why behind it. And I mean, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going through a traumatic experience, and Azuko's going through a bag right now, but when you go through a traumatic experience, your brain is going to do all it can to protect you and to really make sure you don't remember that experience.
And you have experiences or things like PTSD where a symptom of PTSD is you can't remember the event that happened because your brain's simply trying to protect you, because that what you went through or that thought, that memory can cause harm. Mm-hmm. And so it literally shuts it out, turns it off.
Alters it, or
alters it, does a whole bunch of things. But with DID, it literally your brain creates a separate self with separate thoughts, memories, actions, feelings. I mean, it's still you, but it's not you, which is weird and kind of, I don't know, mind-blowing in a sense. And so that's really all we know as far as risk factors go.
Yeah.
And which is, like, with what we've been able to find, that's really the only risk factor / cause of DID is a heavy amount of sexual abuse or physical abuse as children.
Yeah, that's common among a lot of disorders, but that can be, it's interesting how it can be characterized specifically with DID, that's like the number one cause of it. So
yeah, and I'm sure there's, because I mean, everyone that goes through traumatic experiences, they don't all get DID. Mm-hmm. So there's got to be some predisposition genetically for it.
Yeah.
So that can be definitely a risk factor, genetics.
Yeah. Considering the relatively small amount of people that actually develop it.
Right.
And so there's got to be some type of abnormal or rare genetic code or gene that you get that just predisposes you for that type of brain formation that allows that to happen.
Yeah.
And we don't know that. That's speculation, of course, but I would assume that's the case for a lot of disorders. But
right, I would assume so.
I would assume so as well.
I mean, taking it again with the biopsychosocial model, it probably plays a role. Could be a very small amount.
Yeah.
As far as the biological side, or it could play a big amount, depending on the individual.
Yeah.
But
that's important. Yeah, important to remember the total approach towards a person's development and all three aspects of that model.
Yeah.
Shows the importance of not focusing on too much on one thing. We've talked about a lot in this podcast before. But getting into the diagnosis now, of course, this comes straight from the DSM-5, like we do with a lot of these What About series. But the DSM-5 does give us the following diagnostic criteria to properly diagnose this disorder. And the first one is the disruption of identity characterized by two or more distinct personality states marked by the discontinuity in the sense of self and agency, and accompanied by the related alterations in affect, behavior, consciousness, memory, perception, cognition, and or sensor motor functioning. So breaking that down more simply, that there's the two or more personalities are causing a disruption in your memory, perception, or overall cognitive functions.
Yeah. Next here we have recurrent gaps in the recall of everyday events, important personal information, and or traumatic events that are inconsistent with ordinary forgetting. So it's not just, oh, I forgot. It's you forget, important details that no one really forgets. Like, oh, I forgot my wedding day. I forgot I was married.
That's a big one with that Moon Knight show. He doesn't know that he's married.
Okay.
He gets a call from his wife, and it's like, I didn't know that I was married.
Okay,
and,
yeah, so things that are inconsistent with just your regular forgetting.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what happens to me, I'm not going to forget that I'm married.
Yeah, you don't forget that you
heaven
set a
forbid,
date,
unless I hit my head hard enough.
Yeah,
I can forget. But
I guess that brings up another good point, that they're going to rule out, and I think we talk about this in one of the diagnosed criteria, is that other things are ruled out, like amnesia and like brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, things like that. Third diagnostic criteria is that the symptoms cause clinically significant distress or an impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And that's with most disorders, that the clinician or practitioner is going to go through a certain set of criteria to find out, is this causing distress in your life? Is it dangerous? Is it dysfunctional? Or is it, I can't remember the fourth D right now, but there's like the 4 Ds of diagnostic criteria when it comes to abnormal psychology. And a clinician or therapist is going to go through those to see if this issue is causing significant problems in your life.
Yeah, because if it's not, then go you.
Yeah,
like
that's interesting.
You're not having any issues. Yeah.
Interesting human. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need treatment if you have a good, healthy life.
Yeah, right. So next here, the disturbance is not a normal part of a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice. Note, in children, the symptoms are not better explained by imaginary playmates or other fantasy play. So it's not just... So number one, it's not a normal part of the culture, of religious practice. Because, I mean, I don't know. Someone who, let's say they're in the Bible Belt in Kansas or Missouri, they're out there and they have their good old Christian folk, someone with the gift of tongues, who starts yelling and saying things. They might say, oh my gosh, they might have a DID.
Yeah.
God forbid. Take them in. But that was just because of a religious practice.
Yeah, it's important. And there's a lot of cultures around the world that, I believe in Native American cultures, I think like possession and things of that nature are quite common in like rituals and things like that.
Like they're on some peyote.
Yeah, yeah. Or if you're, and I guess that points to the next diagnostic criteria is that the symptoms cannot be attributable to some types of the physiological effects of a substance. And so if you're on LSD, you're taking a lot of psilocybin, mushrooms, acid, probably even marijuana, things like that could cause like a psychoactive dissociative state. The clinician's going to make sure you're not token every day on acid or a significant amount of THC, because that, again, it's not DID if you're just high all the time on shrooms or other hallucinogens, because that could probably cause some DID-like symptoms to always be on shrooms. Every weekend you're getting super high on mushrooms, and it causes the dissociative states of multiple personalities.
You got your high self and your sober self.
Yeah, exactly. Like the high self that's two different personalities, but that's not DID. That's just a substance abuse disorder. So it's important to, that's a big thing that a clinician's gonna rule out, I guess. That'd be the term.
Yeah, I'd say so. Okay, now we're moving on to treatment. So for treatment, therapy has been found to be the most effective, and the following is what is most commonly found in DID treatment as far as therapy goes. So you have identifying and working through past trauma or abuse. So things like EMDR we've talked about. My wife does what's called, oh gosh, I don't want to get it wrong. I think it's IPT, the integrative processing technique. Processing technique. Anyway, she was on the podcast quite some time ago. I was going to say a couple episodes ago, quite some time ago. Maybe we got to have her on again to talk about it, but that's really a great tool to talk about trauma and to work through it. So you have tools to work through trauma, then you have managing sudden behavioral changes, and then you have merging separate identities into a single identity. How? I don't know. I'm not a professional in that. When it comes to DID. I don't know. I mean,
that's what psychiatry.org said, that's what therapists do. It didn't elaborate, but I'm sure it's extensive, and I'm sure it's I'd say complex to try to merge those into one. I would be very curious to see what that looks like.
Right, I was about to say, I want to see someone do it. I want to see what it looks like.
Maybe we'll have to elaborate that on a future episode. Maybe do like a part 2 sometime in the future.
Yeah.
After we've looked into this a little bit more, because I can't even imagine what that would look like.
Me either.
Honestly.
Maybe you talk to it, like the other personalities, and get them to come out.
Yeah, and I guess going off of the silly evidence from the movies, what they do in Split is I believe it's like a clinical psychologist, like doctor, who's talking with this person. He asks the individual, can I speak with blank? Can I speak with this personality? Can I speak with this personality? And she'll ask, who is in charge right now? And because different personalities can be in charge, and you can completely lose sense of who you originally were. That's like another thing, I guess. I don't know if that's just the movie or if that's real.
I feel like I've seen that too. I think it was in another movie or something. It was because they asked, who am I talking to right now? And like they would ask permission to speak to other personalities. But again, that was a movie. Unless I saw it in real life. I don't know. No, wouldn't have been real life.
This is something we're going to have to definitely do a lot of more research into. Yeah. But I would assume that it's a lot of talk therapy.
Right. I can't imagine it'd be too much different than that.
Yeah.
Like, what else are you going to do? You know?
Yeah. This is something I'm definitely going to look into more, because like I said, I can't even fathom what that would look like in a clinical setting. So yeah, I'm sure it's not that complex. I'm sure it's specific.
Yeah.
Anywho, we always talk about medication when it comes to different treatments and different treatment options. There is no medication that specifically treats DID, but other psychotropic medications may be prescribed to control the symptoms of anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
Maybe some type of antipsychotic or mood stabilizer to, like we always talk about, to raise your emotional baseline or to stabilize you. Or I know a lot of clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists will prescribe some type of sleeping medication to make sure that you're sleeping properly, to make sure that just overall your baseline is good so you can come to therapy and properly work on yourself.
Yeah.
And so in that dosage has to be low enough to where you're still motivated, but also high enough to where you're stable. And so that's like a middle ground where and this is something we might talk about in the future and something I'm learning more about, that there needs to be more like a teamwork effort when it comes to psychiatrists and therapists.
Right.
And some therapists, especially those with doctoral degrees and have done medical residency, can actually prescribe medication. And so like a one-stop shop type of thing. But most people go to a psychiatrist and a therapist, or a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And you do both treatments at the same time. And then from my understanding, there's not a whole lot of communication or correlation in the types of treatment that are given. Maybe the psychiatrist is giving way too high of a dose and it's affecting the person's stability and it makes therapy harder, or it's way too low and it's making therapy harder. Because the goal should be effective therapy. And from my personal perspective and opinion, that the goal should be effective personal talk therapy or psychotherapy.
Right. I mean, would you want to be dependent on medication your whole life?
Exactly.
Or would you rather be able to do your best to not necessarily control it, but to be able to live your life with it outside of medications?
Yeah. And the medications, like we just said, are just there to control the byproducts, control the other symptoms, because there's no antipsychotic that specifically goes into the brain and treats the imbalances that create the multiple personalities. There is medications for schizophrenia that can help with the delusions and things like that. There's not anything really like that as of yet. Maybe there will be in the future.
Yeah, that'd be wild.
Medicine's amazing. Science is crazy at how these miracle drugs we get all the time. So maybe we'll see that in the future, and that might help treatment a lot. But as of right now, it's really medications to treat the byproduct symptoms, and then get the therapy you need to merge those identities, which again, we don't know how that works.
Yeah, but we do know it's possible.
Yes.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how. And if you are someone by chance who does have DID and you don't know or you doubt that there's ever going to be help for you, or that you can get the help you need, the treatment you need to heal yourself, you can. It's been done before, and it's done every day, really. And so it's possible. That's all we need to know here. And again, you are worth it. It doesn't matter what you've done, who you are, what you will do, what you're doing. You're worth it. Okay, your worth is always 110%. It's always there. You are always worthy. Your worth is
incalculable.
Incalculable. It's a good word.
Yeah.
It's a Google.
It's unfathomable.
Fathomable. Yeah, but you're awesome. And thank you for listening. If you made it this far, you're the best.
Absolutely.
It's people like you that we keep doing this for.
You listening right now, you know who you are because you're hearing these words.
No, but really, thank you very much. And we hope you learned something new this week. And we'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Have a good one.
What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah.